For almost 2 years now, I've been a little bit obsessed with the idea of creating procedural stained glass windows and simulating colorful beams of light passing through them. Something like this. There are many games that have windows with lighting effects that are faked in various ways, but I was having a hard time finding examples of games doing this for something as complex as a stained glass window with its many colors. But I felt compelled to figure out how to do this, so I set out on a quest to create procedural stained glass windows with this lighting in Godot, and this is the journey. I've been taking notes and I have a bunch of ideas here on how to do this, and the most promising one I think involves actually modifying Godot's engine code to change how the volumetric lighting is working, so that will be interesting when we get to that part. But I think before I get to that, I want to start out by just generating some stained glass looking textures that I will then use throughout this project. I want the base for the texture to be based on kind of like a Voronoi diagram, and then I want to kind of layer different shapes on top of it based on these like alchemy symbols to give it a kind of mystical look and make it more interesting. So it's not just, cells. I started out by creating a mesh in the world to display the textures. And then I started working on the texture generation. So I think if we use cellular noise, we can probably tweak this. This is a good start, right? I set up some colors for this thinking that I would probably change them later, but spoiler alert, I didn't. All right, we have stained glass. That was pretty quick, right? And then I started working on the script that would actually draw interesting shapes on top of this noise background. Godot has a bunch of useful built-in drawing functions, which I hadn't really explored before, so I spent some time looking at those and figuring out what I could do. Since stained glass consists of solid shapes with lead lines in between, I knew I'd want to draw whatever I was drawing as outlined, filled-in shapes, so I had to figure out how to do that. I got some shapes drawing with outlines, but I wasn't sure how I should actually generate more interesting patterns and also more different types of shapes. I mean, this is a decent start here. I think I just need to actually think about what I want it to look like more before I just kind of code random things. So I did a bit of geometry research and started writing some helper functions to draw shapes in different rotations. With these functions in place, I was able to create some example windows by hand, which looked kind of cool actually, but I obviously eventually wanted this to be done procedurally, not manually, but it was fun to experiment with. And at the end of the day, even though it wasn't really procedural yet, I was happy with how it was looking. And you can see how kind of just layering all these shapes can kind of make interesting things. This is a good starting point. I think what I want to do today is make it so that it actually generates procedural windows like this that change when I refresh it. And I also want to add some more polygon shapes to this as well, probably a pentagon and a hexagon. I realized I could actually just modify my existing triangle generation code to generate other n-gons. So I refactored that into one function that generates any polygon given a number of sides. Okay, that was actually easy. So how do we actually place these in an interesting way? My thought is that, like, looking at these examples I found, we definitely want to have the design focus on a circle or maybe multiple circles. Initially, I was thinking about starting the generation by placing a number of circles in the window in rows and columns, kind of like I did with the fruit basket in my farming game. So I wrote some code to do that. I've been writing all this logic, but I don't even think this is necessarily what I want here. So instead of generating multiple alchemy circles, maybe it would be better to just have one and then kind of overlay other things on top of that. So I switched to that. All right, so this is probably better. Then I started writing code that would place other shapes on the window based on where the circle was located. This whole process was just a lot of guessing about what might look cool and seeing how it worked. So I feel like right now, the part I've more kind of manually set up, the center part, is kind of cool. I like that, that's cool. I like the beams. I eventually decided to make it so that the main circle only would appear in the top half of the window because I kind of liked how that made it a focal point on the window. I think that looks better. Yeah, there's a lot of open questions here, but I mean, this is a good start, right? At the end of the day, I had something looking much cooler than before with some interesting patterns. Now I wanted to actually outline the background cells to make them fit in better with the rest of the shapes. So I worked on a shader that would look at the colors in the noise and generate outlines for each cell. We could definitely make these outlines more smooth, but I think for now this is fine. And for now, I think it's time to start thinking about the lighting, which it will be tricky because the main approach I want to take involves figuring out how to modify Godot's engine and recompile it. So hopefully that works out. Otherwise, we'll have to do something a lot more hacky. In theory, I think if you had accurate ray tracing based lighting, it could be quite easy to achieve this effect because you could just put a light behind the window like you would in real life, and that would just automatically work. But that's not supported out of the box in Godot, and it's also very computationally expensive, so that didn't seem like a practical solution for me right now. Godot actually does support passing beams of light through volumetric fog like this, which could almost give me the effect I want, because as you can see here, you can have different spotlights, and those spotlights can have different colors, and then you can see the beams through the fog. So that's promising. And Godot also supports projector textures, so if you have a spotlight, you can add a stained glass texture to the spotlight to project that image onto walls and things in the scene. So ideally what I could do is have volumetric fog in my scene and then have a spotlight coming from each stained glass window that projects the texture of the window, but also make that projector texture color the beam of light that's coming from the spotlight through the volumetric fog, and that's not supported by default. There is an open bug requesting what I'd like, and I want to see if I can modify the engine code to actually do that. I started out by setting up the general way I thought this would work by positioning a spotlight behind the window and enabling volumetric fog. And then I wanted to see if I could set the projector texture on that spotlight to the generated texture of the window and just make sure that part was working. And to do that, I think I just need to grab the image from this viewport and then actually set that for the spotlight. And that worked and was already looking kind of cool, although obviously the color of the lighting was not affected. So with this in place, I decided it was time to try to figure out how to modify the engine to test my idea. And through my prior research, I had found some files in Godot's engine code on GitHub that I thought would be relevant to this idea. This is probably the code that handles the projection, but again, I've never actually touched the engine code before or even compiled it, so I was nervous. I'm not sure how difficult this will be. Luckily, actually creating a custom build of Godot was quite simple. It looks like in theory, once this is done downloading, I might just have to run this command and it will create a Godot executable. In not much time, I had forked the engine and created a custom build, and I was able to run it. Wow, okay, we have our own version of Godot. Okay, that's promising. Before I tried making complicated changes, I wanted to make sure that changes I made would actually be reflected when I built the engine. So my thought is here, maybe we can modify this to just be a specific color and see if that changes how things are displaying in the engine. If now we recompile the engine, I think my spotlight that's white will be red. We'll see if that works like I think it will. When I made this change and recompiled the engine, unfortunately, my light was not red. Okay, that's not red, but it's different. But something was changing because now the light was just completely not visible. So at least there was that. I was pretty sure though I was modifying the right line to affect the color of the spotlights through the fog, so I wasn't sure what was going on. The tricky thing about shaders is they are much harder to debug than normal code. You can't just print out values or set breakpoints easily. I wish I could just print what these are, but I can't. And I'm pretty new to this sort of development, so I wasn't really sure how to tell what was going wrong. I mean, this is good progress for today. It's almost midnight, so maybe I'll sleep on it and come back to it tomorrow, but I can modify the engine now, so we're one step closer to being able to test out my ideas at least, even if I haven't figured it out yet. I'm hopeful. We'll see though. I really want to know what these values are, and there's not like a simple way to debug that with shaders normally, but I heard about something called RenderDoc, and I am trying that now hooked up to Godot and trying to see if I can get any useful information from that. I have no idea what's going on here, but I think in theory I might be able to see like the values of different things, but I'm not sure how to find the values I want. Everything was kind of obfuscated, so all of these are turned into variables that I can't keep track of because they have random names. So I did some research and I realized I could modify Godot to include more debug information in the shader code output. So I did that. So now I've modified the engine to debug modifying the engine. And that was helpful. After a bunch of digging, I eventually was able to figure out how to find data passed into the shader, and I realized something very important. For some reason it's set to 50, 50, 50. The color values were out of 255, not out of 0 to 1 like they are in normal Godot shaders. And I don't know why that is, but that was likely my problem. So I changed the line to set the color to red with 25500 and rebuilt the engine. Right, please, please be red. Probably won't be, but oh, it worked. Oh, so that actually helped. That means that I should be able to modify this code now. Well, that's exciting. Look at that beautiful red caused by this engine change here. I guess that was worth the hours of effort. And now we can probably test out my idea of actually sampling the projector texture and using that to specify this color value here. And I don't know how this will go, but we can try. I was thinking this might actually not be that hard because I had already found the part in the engine code where the projector texture is used to influence where the spotlight hits in the world. So we need something like this. So I was thinking I could just basically copy that logic and move it into the volumetric fog process shader as well. The problem was, having never worked with code like this before, I didn't understand how it was structured or how different variables were actually passed into the different shaders. Not sure where this variable is coming from and how to make them accessible in the volumetric fog process shader as well as where they already were accessible. I went through a lot of guessing and checking and recompiling the engine and getting tons of errors. And I spent a long time just trying to figure out where different uniform variables are set to be provided to the compute shaders. But where are these coming from? I found the fog C++ file that I thought I should be able to use to provide the uniform bindings to the volumetric fog shader, but my changes just weren't working as I expected. I spent a lot of time on this, and by the end of the day, I was just still left with errors. Why is it null? What is going on? And I was just confused why these variables weren't being provided when I thought they should be. I feel like this would be really simple if I knew what I was doing, but I don't. I think somehow the uniforms are overlapping, maybe. So I think at this point, my best option is to come back tomorrow, hopefully with a fresh perspective, and hopefully we can get this worked out. The next day, I just spent more time debugging this issue, but still couldn't figure it out, so I took another break, and I came back the following day, now day 3 of trying to figure this out. After a lot of staring at my code, I eventually realized what the issue was, and it was quite small. Oh, maybe it should only be if it's not a copy? Wait, maybe that's the problem. Oh, there's no errors. Okay. It turns out I had just put the uniform bindings in the incorrect location in the volumetric fog process shader so that they were expected in a shader mode that they weren't provided in, and that was causing my issues. At this point, to test out my idea, all I had left to do was adapt the projector code from the light shader to work within the fog shader. So this is the code that makes the projector show up in the game like this, the projected texture, and I need to adapt that to the actual fog itself. Now, I didn't totally understand this code, like much of this part of the project, but I was fairly certain I'd be able to just adapt it because it should work almost the same. And after a bit of tweaking here, I actually got it working. Oh! Wait, is it working? Is it working? Oh my god. Wait, it's working. And it looked better than I expected. This is like exactly what I wanted. 3 days of work or so led to this moment. Wait, this is amazing. I can't believe it actually looks pretty good. Let's try it with like custom texture now. I don't know if that will work, but that's crazy. Look at that. Wait, this is so good. Oh wow. I am so happy I stuck with this. Look at this. This might be one of the most satisfying things I've gotten working because I didn't know if it would work. And obviously it wasn't actually that much engine code to change, just something I am really not familiar with. So yeah, this was worth it. This looks so cool. I honestly wasn't sure up until this point if it would really work and not just look like a blob of brown, but it actually looked really good. And it's not just useful for stained glass, like you could use it to project the Godot image through like a flashlight and have the beams of light be blue like the image. So yeah, let me just fix up this code here and then I'll probably take a break for the day. What I'm thinking is it would be cool if I had an actual environment to move around in, not just this floating in space thing. So I've been looking up some images of Gothic style cathedrals and stained glass window frames because I think I want to make an environment in Blender, bring that into Godot, set up a character controller, and then place the windows around this cathedral environment. The problem is I haven't done 3D modeling in a bit now and I don't know how to make things that look like this, but I'll do my best. I decided to first model some window frames that I could then put the glass in and then worry about the actual cathedral environment later. I first modeled an arch-inspired window, then I started working on a circular window inspired by rose windows. I ended up making some interesting designs and I combined it with the arch window. I only had a couple of hours to work on this day, so I didn't get a ton done, but I had a frame ready to bring into Godot to test out the next day. I started out by applying a stone texture to the window frame, and then I brought the frame into Godot and tried putting the stained glass plane within it. I realized here that the circle design at the top of the frame was a bit too much. I don't think this circular thing I modeled actually makes sense with my patterns. The patterns are kind of replicating that, so we can probably just cut that. Then I started thinking about how I could actually make the stained glass plane appear correctly only within the window frame and not outside of it. This was actually not that tricky. I realized a simple solution was just model the exact shape I needed to fit within the window frame in Blender, set the UVs appropriately so that the glass texture wouldn't get stretched, and then apply the glass texture to this window glass shape within Godot, and that just worked. I think that works, right? Then I made a separate scene for the stained glass windows and, in general, refactored some node structure to allow me to easily create multiple windows within the world. Okay, cool. So now we can just create tons of windows by just dragging them into the scene. That's cool. I set up spotlights to spawn in for each window and wrote some code so that the projector texture would be automatically set based on the procedural texture of the associated window. I was thinking about how to actually position the spotlights and how to configure their properties, but I realized that would be easier if I had some sort of actual environment to test it out within. So I set up a test environment using CSG meshes. And then I set up a basic player and player controller so that you could move around the environment and look around. Well, it's an environment. Maybe not the best environment, but it's a start environment. I continued working on the environment and placed windows on the walls. And I started experimenting with the positioning and parameters of the lights to get them to look better, but it was tricky to decide how it should really look. I was concerned about it looking accurate to light shining in through the windows. I mean, I don't know if it looks accurate, but I would eventually realize that that didn't really matter as long as it looked cool. At the end of the day, the project definitely felt like it was coming together even with the very simple environments. Definitely feels mystical. And you can see the colors change based on the stained glass. I wanted to add a circular window type as well, so I modeled one based on my existing prior one and created a glass panel mesh for it as well. And then I placed one at the end of the hallway in the environment. I mean, that's kind of cool, right? I then made it so that the inner parts of the window would actually result in shadows from the light, which made things look a bit better. So now you can see that the light is actually being shadowed by the frame, which makes it look a little bit more accurate. I wanted the glass to look a bit more glass-like, so I worked on a noise-based shader to add to the glass mesh to affect the normals and make it look a bit less flat and a bit more like glass. Yeah, that looks a little better. Just a little bumpy on the glass. I then wanted to see what an object moving through the scene would look like and how it would work with the light. Yeah, let's just test out this idea by animating this moving through the hallway. So I added a simple sphere to the environment and animated it so it would move up and down the hallway. This is looking pretty darn cool. I thought it would be cool if the environment felt a bit more dynamic, and I realized that one way to do that could be to add some kind of dust particles floating around the air and catching the light. It looks spooky. So I spent a while tweaking settings on a particle system to try to figure out something that would look cool. Looks like it's snowing. I ended up with some interesting results along the way. What is going on? I also just found myself getting distracted by how pretty the lighting looked. This is pretty. I love how you can see like the beams of light coming from the individual colors on the windows. I'm happy this worked out. I eventually ended up figuring out something decent for the particle system, and I attached it to players so it would move with them as they walked around the environment. Yeah, okay, this is fine. It just adds a little bit of intrigue. I tweaked the particles just a bit more before deciding it was good enough. Probably people won't even really notice this, you know? It's kind of subtle if you're not looking for it, but I do think it adds something. I really wanted the environment to feel like a Gothic cathedral, so I decided to try to model some Gothic arches in Blender. Try to follow this, potentially. What is going on? So I've gotten 4 minutes into this video in about 30 minutes. Could be worse. After a bit of struggle and also not following the whole tutorial, I ended up with a Gothic arch that looked pretty decent, and I brought it into Godot to see how it would look. We could probably work with something like this, I think. And then just put kind of walls on the sides and add the windows, and maybe it will work. I ended up making the arches a bit taller to feel more dramatic, and then I started thinking about the different variations of walls I would need to actually make a closed-in church environment. I guess we need one with 2 walls and 3 walls. It's been weird to have this church that has no doors, but you can't go outside, so... Once I had made the various arch pieces with different walls to set up an environment, I brought them into Godot and started setting up a basic level. This was looking mostly cool, but there were some weird issues like flickering textures. I don't know what that is. And gaps in various places, but I decided to temporarily ignore those issues and just add in some windows, and I was really happy with how things were coming together. This is pretty cool, right? This is feeling like a weird Gothic church or castle or something, and I made this myself. I think we're getting close. I think just maybe a day or so more of work and I'll be happy with this demo. I spent a while just trying to fix the problems with my arch models. After quite a while, I realized that the issue with weird shimmering textures was due to Z fighting with duplicate faces on certain parts of the model that I had somehow accidentally made.
Okay, so there were like duplicate faces here. That was probably the shimmering problem.
And I also filled in the end caps, the ground ledge to make it look better. And once I did all of this and imported them back into Godot, they did look a lot better. But for some reason, my character is now falling into and getting stuck in the ground, which is kind of weird.
Why am I stuck on the floor now?
Godot can automatically generate collision shapes if you have certain flags set in your model in Blender, so I was doing that, but clearly something was going wrong with the new collision shapes and I wasn't sure what.
So the player is sinking into the ground for some reason, but why? It looks like there's a collision shape here.
I decided to start making a new environment that would be the final one.
We're still in the ground, but I think this is more kind of what I want. I think I'll have like an open hallway with a wall at the end and then some closed off sections on the side here, but I don't know why we're in the ground still. Let's figure that out. Wait, oh, are the normals messed up or something? Oh, okay. So the problem probably is that the normals are reversed here.
And that's resulting in an incorrectly generated collision shape. So after I fixed that for all of the models and brought them back into Godot, things were working as expected.
All right, that's better.
Then I started thinking about what I actually wanted the final level design to look like for the demo. I knew that I wouldn't be making a full game, just a demo of the lighting in a fun environment, so I wanted it to look nice. I got the layout looking nice.
I think this is a decent demo setup.
So then I started adding in the windows around the inside of the building.
Probably want to make one side less bright than the other side because the sun would be on one side or the moon would be on one side.
I decided to add one big circular window at the center of the church as kind of the main centerpiece. I wanted the centerpiece circular window to be super powerful and bright looking since it's the center of the environment, so I spent a while tweaking that. Here I noticed that the dust particles had randomly disappeared.
Yeah, wait, actually, what happened to the particle effect? Layer. Oh, I just like lost the particles. I actually don't know where they went. I somehow deleted it earlier today, so they just went away. Let's add that back in.
Luckily, I had version control and I was able to just get them back into the scene, but yeah, definitely use version control.
Cool, we got the particles back.
At the end of this day, I was pretty happy with how things were looking.
This looks cool. So you wander down this hallway, and then you get into this bigger room. And then down here we have, for some reason, a super bright light, which I kind of like because it's kind of interesting. I feel like it would be fun if there was like an altar here or something like that. And then in here we could have some like benches and things. But I mean, this is looking cool. I feel like my main problem with this right now is I don't really know how to position the lights to make them look accurate.
But I think sometimes you just have to accept that if something looks cool, it is cool, and not worry so much about the realism, because in the end, games are all about faking things.
So I think I'm getting to the point with this project where I kind of want to move on to the next thing, and it's already looking pretty cool, even if it's not doing everything I had thought about doing, but that's okay. You always have to call it somewhere. So I think we're basically there. I shouldn't spend too much more time on this. Maybe I'll come back to it eventually, but I mean, it's looking pretty darn cool, right? It could be cool if these windows could be kind of animated. I'm not sure totally if that will work, but that would be really cool. It would probably be a huge performance hit, but I might just try it briefly and see what happens. To do this, I basically have to capture an image every frame from the stained glass viewports and then pass them in as the projector texture, which is then used for the lighting as well. To do that though, I realized I would have to refactor my drawing code because it was previously written with the assumption that the windows would only be drawn once. But if I wanted to update the rotation of the shapes, I'd have to store the shapes position somehow to ensure they're drawn correctly each frame. So when we're drawing polygons, we could just store their information in an array to redraw them, but then change the rotation, I guess. So I spent some time doing this refactor to store the shape data so I could reuse it for drawing the same thing across frames. I got that working, and then I added in some code to rotate the shapes. Oh. Look at that. So that's actually working other than the dots, obviously. Maybe let's turn off the dot for now. Okay, we want this to be like smoother, but let's just see what happens here. Okay, that's kind of cool, right? Obviously it's not changing the light, but it's kind of fun that the glass is actually animating. Then I switched to updating the projector texture in Process so it would stay consistent and constantly update to be the same as the animated texture. And this worked and looked very cool, but as expected, this was very slow. But look at that, that's really cool. Like the lights change, very magical feeling. And I need to think about this. Maybe there's a way to optimize it a bit better, but in theory, this looks pretty cool, right? This would be really cool if it wasn't lagging. Like what's the FPS? 10? Is it really 10? That's obviously not ideal. Oh look, we're up to 12 FPS, so that's pretty good. It's purely this line here that's really slow.
So I tried out a few different ideas to get this to work better. I first tried only updating the window projector texture less frequently, but that looked pretty bad and choppy, although it did help a lot with the performance.
For the lights, it's not so bad, but for the ground, it's pretty bad.
But when I had more frequent update times where it actually looked okay, the FPS was still pretty bad.
Like, look how cool that looked. Look at the FPS. We could just update the windows that are only close to the player,
because that would be a lot more relevant than updating a window across the level. So I wrote some code to do that, and it actually worked a lot better. With this solution though, it was a bit jarring to notice that the projector image on the floor would only start moving when you got close, and then immediately jump to match the current window texture, which could be many frames ahead.
Ideally, you wouldn't see that pop in.
So to mitigate this, I tried making faraway projector textures only update infrequently when you are far away, but that still looked pretty weird. You could see it like jumping in the distance, even though I think this is a pretty common solution for animations that are far away in games. It just wasn't what I wanted. So then I changed things so that the window would actually only animate when the player is nearby, so that when you got close to it, it wouldn't jump, because it would actually just start animating and updating the projector at the same time, so there would be no inconsistency between the two.
When you walk back in, it starts going. That looks pretty darn good, I think.
And I found that this looked the best of anything I had tried so far, and it helped a ton with performance, so I was happy with the solution.
You walk away, stop spinning, but you can't really tell from that far away. You get closer and you look at it, it's spinning. So maybe it's not perfect, but I think this is actually pretty good. This is working well enough for me. I don't know how well this will also run actually on other computers, but on my pretty powerful computer, this seems mostly fine. I think this is a really cool effect. I actually think this is really cool. I think this adds a lot of dimension to this, so I'm glad I got this working.
I decided I should really be wrapping things up at this point.
I think we need to just kind of call it done soon, but here's kind of a list of things I was thinking about doing. So I've prioritized some of these things I wanted to add here, and I just want to try to finish them up and just kind of call it, because I think this is a really cool demo already. So let's do that. Let's just do a few of these things.
I started out by adding back in the small circles that would appear on some polygon corners.
Now let's make the animation more interesting so they're not just all rotating that way.
I gave each shape a random rotation speed and direction within a certain range, and that looked much more interesting. I tried letting the rectangle shapes rotate as well, but eventually decided against that because I felt it was good to have the stability of them.
Makes it feel a bit more grounded, maybe.
I then started thinking about if I should consider switching to different color palettes for the windows, but didn't get too far on that. I knew I didn't have much time this day, so I decided to put the colors thing on hold and instead model a Gothic bench to put in my cathedral environment to make it feel a bit more interesting. I found some images.
I found something a little bit simple that I can actually make easily.
And modeled something inspired by them and applied a wood texture to the bench. I got it into the game.
All right, sure, that looks fine, I think, as a bench.
And started placing them around the level.
All right, that looks a bit less empty, I suppose.
I tweaked the benches a little to make them all wood because I realized that looked better. I realized the benches weren't actually casting shadows in the environment, which looked a bit weird, so I fixed that by moving the rendering layer into the shadow casting one for the spotlights.
Thinking about other things I could add in this environment to make it more dynamic, and originally I was thinking about adding a bird that flies around, but it feels a bit unnecessary, I think. But I remember that I had worked on this project before, and I had modeled these candles. Maybe I could just make some candles like floating around the environment.
So I brought in my candles and animated the positions using tweens so they looked like they were floating. Then I placed a bunch of these candles around the environment in interesting places.
I mean, it's cool, kind of spooky.
Keeping with this mystical theme, I thought it would be cool if there was some sort of altar under the big circular window. So I looked up the ones in old school RuneScape and I modeled one in Blender inspired by that and brought it into Godot.
All right, yeah, this is cool. I think we're almost there.
This was looking cool, but I realized it could be even cooler if there were more mystical seeming objects on it. So from that prior Blender project with the candles, I was able to bring in a book and a mysterious orb and place them on the altar, and I thought that looked pretty cool. I still wasn't sure at this point about if I should change the color palette for the windows or not, so I spent some more time considering this and also writing a shader to set the colors of the noise in the background to be set individually, but I got a bit tired before I could finish this and decided to just come back the next day to make a final decision.
I'll just come back tomorrow morning and finish it up. It should only take like an hour or two max, and then I'll be done. But honestly, like, is my original one just fine? Am I way overthinking this? I've showed it to different people and they've all said they liked the color scheme, even though it was kind of just chosen quickly. So maybe I should stop overthinking. Could it be improved? Probably yes, but I kind of like it at this point. So yeah, I guess just the last couple hours of work I won't use, but that's okay. It's just good to experiment sometimes. So now I think all I really want to add is some kind of spooky gothic music or something like that that I'm just going to find on itch.
So I looked on itch.io and found something that fit the vibe and added it to the demo. And then I decided I was finally done.
All right, I think this works. I think we're done. Finally. Look how cool this looks with this moving, the lights and the altar. I am so happy I was able to actually get this done. This has been a project I've had in my mind for like 2 years, and now it's finally happened. Hopefully I can get the changes I made to the engine itself actually into Godot eventually. I think I will need to make a few more changes to get this to work with different types of light as well before I propose the change to the engine itself, but I think it would be cool and hopefully they'll want this change as well. Let me know if you do too in the comments.
There was just one more change I had to make. While editing this video, I realized that the entire time my projector textures for the windows were actually horizontally reversed from what they should have been. Like if you look at the projected animation on the ground here, you can see how it's moving in the reverse direction of the window, which isn't ideal. I didn't notice before because most of the window designs are quite symmetrical, but I fixed that now, so things are looking a bit more accurate. So this is the final project, and I think it turned out really well. I'm so happy I was actually able to achieve this effect that I had been thinking about for so long, and I love the atmosphere. I think it would be cool to use something like this in an actual game someday as well. I think it has really cool vibes. If you'd like to try it out yourself, I have it on itch.io and linked in the description. I don't know if it works super well on all computers, but if you have a powerful computer, it should work fine. Also, if you'd like to support the channel and get access to the source code and assets for this project, as well as my previous projects, I have a Patreon page that I'll have linked in the description. Thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting me over there already. I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.